Sex and happiness both enrich our lives, yet it's surprising how few people can honestly say that they enjoy regular and fulfilling sex or describe themselves and their lives as happy. Host Laurie Handlers helps you to experience real intimacy and happiness. You'll laugh a little, learn a little, and we hope put a smile on your face and a smile in your life. Now here's Laurie.
Hi, everybody. This is Laurie Handlers, and you're listening to an episode of Sex and Happiness, a show about your sex and your happiness. Today, I'm very excited. I have a different topic. I actually announced it on my last show that I was going to be talking about this time. So for some of you, you won't be surprised because you heard the last show. I said I was going to be talking about plant medicine and how that may affect your sex and your happiness, like what could happen with plant medicine that could transform you, shift you, change you. And it's a really big topic these days. I remember when it wasn't such a big topic, when very few people I knew were dabbling in plant medicine and people were afraid to talk about it. And I come from the 60s generation, so I certainly did a lot of medicine in my life. But still, if you weren't from the 60s, a lot of people didn't talk about it. But now people are making journeys and pilgrimages to South America, Central America, places all over the globe where they're experimenting with their DNA, I want to say, and they're experimenting with plant medicines. And what I'm talking about are anything from peyote to ayahuasca to other huascas. I took another huasca recently, to Cambo, there are probably things I don't even know about, San Pedro. So today I have somebody who's been in this life since he was about 14. His first experience was with Lakota Indian Nation, or Lakota Native American Nation in the United States. And he was a kid, I say, and he's a grown-up now, but he probably thinks he's still a kid. And so I'm going to introduce you to him. His name is Kevin Leroy, and he has spent his life exploring and studying with many indigenous people across the globe. And one thing stands out for Kevin, and that is that these so-called primitive peoples are amongst the happiest, longest living humans on the planet. Kevin seeks to build a bridge where teaching and tools that have served humanity so well for many thousands of years can be accessed and integrated into society in a practical and acceptable way, in support of the ultimate goal of happier, sexier people here on this planet. So, Kevin, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hello. It is an absolute pleasure to be here.
Yeah, great. I can just see your smiling face. So let me just say a little bit how Kevin and I met. We met at a Tantra festival recently in Fiji. And, we saw each other, and Kevin was assisting there, so we had some connection, but nothing until the end of the Tantra festival, when traditional Fijian indigenous people came to give us a kava ceremony. And kava is a plant medicine. And they said you could clap 3 times, say bula, and say how much you wanted. And I said I wanted a little, and Kevin was sitting next to me, and he said he wanted a tsunami.
Yeah, I think their choices, they said, do you want low tide or high tide? And I was like, tsunami. yeah. I'm like, I'm in. Yeah.
So that was really earth-shattering. It was like, it shook me a little bit. I didn't know who you were, Kevin. I didn't know at the time.
Yeah.
The experiences that you had in your life. And so when you said tsunami, I got a little scared. And then, it didn't have such an effect on you that you were altered or that you weren't able to be lucent and cogent. And so I didn't worry about you anymore. And then consequently we talked, and you told me how much plant medicine experience you had. So let's go back a little bit and talk about how you got to experience your first medicine at 14 or 15 when you were with Lakota Indian tribe?
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing was that I was adopted, so I was separated from my birth mother very early on, like before I was even a year old, and all we really had in the state of Michigan was the very last state that still did what they call closed adoption. So all they really provided was non-identifying information, and it just said that she was a member of the Lakota tribe, basically. So that's all I really knew about my DNA and where I came from. So when I was about 14, I decided, hey, I want to find out about this. So I kind of just went, okay, so I know it's Lakota. So I just went, and I was living in Texas at the time, and I just talked to a bunch of people, and they said, oh, well, this reservation's open, meaning that you can visit them. And I went and visited them, and they said, okay, well, normally when somebody turns 14 or 15, I was 14 at the time, they said normally when they have their 14th or 15th birthday, that's when we consider them to transition into manhood. So we would do this ceremony, which is where you sit in the sweat lodge and you have the peyote cactus and you go through a little bit of a initiation and transformation into manhood. And that, as soon as they said that to me, they said, a lot of people would find that really scary, but I just felt like this is what I had been missing. This is where I was feeling a little bit disconnected from myself in many ways. And I was just like, yes. And, it was never a thing like, oh my gosh, we're going to go get high. It was like, more like, we're going to go and really peel back some of the layers and some of the story about, who we are as people. And so I went, and I really didn't know what was going to happen. And I sat in, and it was very, very hot. It was, I think on that day, I remember it was 93 degrees outside, and I was sitting in the middle of the New Mexico desert. It took about 2.5 hours to wait for the bus to arrive, and then another 4 hours for the bus to take us out nowhere. I knew no one there. I knew nobody. I talked to one of the elders in the city that I was from, San Antonio, Texas, and he had visited there, and he said, come with me to New Mexico. So I had no idea where I was or who I was with. I sat down, and as soon as they started playing some of the music and the ceremony started, I just had this great sense that I was at home and I was safe. And since then, I have just said, this is my path. And I kind of do a little prayer, and I said, this is like a path of surrender, and whatever needs to happen, I offer myself really to the medicines and let them sort of guide and determine how it's all going to manifest on this planet,
Well, thank you. That's a great description and an amazing leap of faith on your part. It was a leap of faith on your part to leave home and trust that you would be okay, and then to go somewhere to a reservation where you knew no one, you weren't part of the culture. They told you there was a rites of passage ritual, and you knew somehow intuitively that that's what you needed, that's what you were missing, and boom, you jumped on the bus. It's a pretty amazing story. Let's backtrack for a second and tell people what a sweat lodge is, because even though I have been in many sweat lodges and I know what sweat lodges are, not everyone, I imagine, listening knows what a sweat lodge is.
Okay, so sweat lodge is, in its very most basic description, is a big hut that they build, usually out of straw and wood, and sometimes they put mud on the outside to kind of seal it, and they put very, very hot rocks in the middle, and they put water on, and it's essentially like a very intense version of a sauna, and depending on the tradition that you're following, you might stay in there from 5 to 6 hours up to a few days. Now, this is, it's considered to be a purification of the body. Of course, you're sweating out all your toxins and you're not getting much more food, but it's also about, at least for the Lakota people, they consider it to be a purification of your heart and your spirit. And maybe on a psychological level, you could describe this as a sort of reset of any of these old patterns, and it's a time to let go of those old patterns of thinking and belief systems that you just really don't think that you need anymore. And in terms of that one that I had at 14, it was also kind of like, it's sort of an initiation experience in that it's very, very uncomfortable and you're just sweating, and it really does feel like, after 8 hours in there, it really does feel like you're going to die at some point. But the thing is that you don't, and you know that everyone's going to be safe. And I felt very, very safe in there, but there was times when I was just wanting to run out, or lift the bottom. I remember I lifted the bottom several times to breathe fresh air, and I felt like I was cheating myself more than anything, but I just needed that oxygen. And then I found that was actually interrupting this process of surrender. So what I find with sweat lodges, the best thing to do is just sit there, and suddenly you sort of transcend the fact that you're in this really uncomfortable place, and you find a real peace within. And it's kind of like that's sort of the process there. It's kind of just trusting the process and trusting the tradition that's been so long. I don't think that I've ever really heard of anybody having any sort of medical issue inside a sweat lodge unless they have pre-existing heart condition, in which case you wouldn't go in anyway. But I mean,
well, there was a big scandal. There was a big scandal in the United States a few years back where there was some spiritual guru. I can't remember the guy's name now, but he brought people into the Arizona desert in sweat lodge, and then somebody did die. And but that was his neglect and his abuse. It wasn't, it gave sweat lodges a bad name, but it was a terrible thing for anybody who's in the spiritual lead business, or that's their calling. Once again, it gave a very bad name to people. When in fact it was on the leader to have allowed those people to drink water or whatever they needed. It wasn't, whatever. So I want to say I did hear of one bad incident, but that's one bad incident in thousands of years of performing sweat lodges, people going in saunas, people going in steam rooms, people going for Turkish baths, all kinds of things. Rarely something like that happen.
Yeah, and I mean, that is the unfortunate thing. And I mean, as these things, because part of my, sort of my goal in life is kind of like making these things accessible for people, but doing it in a really safe way, because I find that as people kind of do jump on this bandwagon a little bit, and it becomes more popular, there can be different motivations other than the healing. I mean, people can get motivated by the money side of things, or they think that, this is just something really cool to do. And I think the one person that I have heard of who was doing sweat lodges where there were deaths, he wasn't following any particular tradition.
Right.
He just kind of said, oh, I've heard a lot of people are doing sweat lodges and that people are having good results, so I'm going to build myself a sweat lodge and invite people over. And so there wasn't really a lot of screening done in terms of, whenever I would invite somebody for any sort of ceremony, there is about 3 pages of questions, and it's just about every sort of background information, like medical, psychological, what's their intentions with their going, what have they heard, what are they expecting to get out of it, and just kind of getting clarification around that is so important, because as you say, I mean, the newspapers and everybody, they love a headline, and it's somewhat more exciting to say, someone died doing this thing, rather than to say, oh yeah, there's been, tens of thousands of years of people having great and amazing results, So it's very important, I think, to kind of have awareness about who you're going to go see and what their background is and what their experience is. And
Exactly.
And really, really, really research who it is, and find people who have gone and seen them and ask them about how it's been, and, and go through this whole screening process. Don't be tempted just to jump into the first person who says, yes, I'm a shaman. What does that really mean these days? We don't know.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So
Yeah.
let's talk a little bit about, so there are many plant medicines that have different effects on the body. Before we get into that and some of the ones that you're more skilled with or more experienced with, we'll say, why do you think plant medicine is having such a big surge right now on the planet? You know, more and more people are seeking out people to do ayahuasca with, and just more and more people are having the experiences, Cambo too. And
Mm.
we'll describe what some of them are in our next segment, but let's just talk about the why of it.
I think in general, I think the truth of it is that traditionally humans have always had some sort of transpersonal psychedelic experience available to them as part of their kind of their normal life. Like if you had some trouble, you would go and see whoever it was in the village. If you were in Siberia, the shaman would have like mushrooms to on hand for the purposes of journeying into these other realms. Every culture has this concept that there's sort of like three realms of reality, and the person who has the medicine and the person who's the healer or the doctor of the village would be always serving these or taking them himself and doing this sort of work. And I think it's only very recently in history, I mean, particularly, I guess, the war on drugs and Nixon, wanting to sort of, I don't know all of the story, but from my understanding, it was basically like, the hippie movement was kind of saying a lot about that, they were protesting the war, and Nixon really didn't like them protesting the war, so he kind of made it all about drugs suddenly and all about that people shouldn't be, and so we had about a good 60, 70 years where suddenly these things which had been legal for thousands and thousands of years were not legal. And then surprise, surprise, things like depression and suicide and people weren't dealing with life very well. And suddenly we've got, this big shift in society where they're just now starting to kind of undo some of those laws, particularly in the realm of ayahuasca. Magic mushrooms are being studied. I mean, marijuana is becoming more and more legal, both for medical and even just recreational use now, because, now that we're allowed to do the studies, they're finding out from a scientific point of view that they actually really help our bodies. And, you can do things like electrocardiogram on a person's brain who's got severe depression all of their life. They do not have the receptor sites for serotonin, and they've done things like 2 or 3 sessions of ayahuasca over 4 months and done another brain scan on them and seen receptor sites growing there, and the person doesn't need to continue taking ayahuasca the rest of their life. They don't need to be on antidepressants for the rest of their life. They actually get better, which is amazing, because most of the drugs that we use to treat something like depression kind of just mask the symptoms, and there's never really a plan to stop taking them. And the idea is you have to deal with the side effects of these medicines for the rest of your life. Whereas
that has something to do with big pharma.
Yeah, and of course there's that aspect that they want to make money off of it, so they're not really, it doesn't pay to cure people, right? It pays,
right.
It pays to keep treating them forever, right? So the concept that you had something that you can do 2 or 3 times in your life, and then suddenly your life is different and better, is a little bit scary to some of the people up higher up. But people are waking up to this, and I think, my personal belief, there's no scientific background to this belief, but I really think it makes sense that we evolved in the forest amongst plants, and that our bodies were made to make use of these things. I think the best thing we can feed our bodies are things that grow on the planet, that grow in the environment where we grew up in, and I think that intrinsically they're good for us, and it makes sense that we should have them. I mean, the United Nations says that ayahuasca isn't actually illegal anymore, that it's a human right to have the access to these medicines, which we've always had access to up until very recently.
Yeah.
So I'm very excited now about the fact that the scientific research is open, so that people who that appeals to, so people who need to be able to take a picture of your brain before and after can have that and say, okay, well, yes, okay, we can see that this is happening, because shamanic medicines are very interesting in the fact that shamanic medicines have an effect both on the physical and on the spiritual, emotional, psychological bodies. So you're kind of working on both realms, and it's very exciting to me that technology is progressing to a point where we can measure these things now.
Yeah, it's wonderful, really wonderful. So we're going to take a little break here. When we come back, we're going to talk about the different medicines and what they affect or what the effects are. And so people know, because I think that a lot of people are still in the dark about it. And there's a lot of interest. There's just a lot of interest. And I know that it can affect people, it can take trauma away from them. If they're brave enough to do it, and that's what it requires, there's a possibility that they can eradicate trauma very easily in their life. And it's all of an investment of a few $100s or a plane trip and taking something that's possibly comfortable or uncomfortable for a few hours. And that's really it. So we'll talk about that a little bit more when we come back from this break. If you just tuned in, you're listening to Sex and Happiness. I'm Laurie Handlers, and today I'm speaking to Kevin Leroy, who has really spent a long time studying and expanding his life through communing with plants and with indigenous peoples around the globe. And so when we come back, we're going to talk about what some of those medicines are and what people take them for. So stay tuned. I think it's pretty interesting. Stay with us. We're coming right back. Did you ever stop to think that love is your birthright? That you don't need to earn it or prove it? You just need to live it. I'm personally inviting you to the path of true love, power, and freedom. If you're ready to enliven your soul through conscious sexuality and dive deeply into profound ritual that frees your heart, I'm inviting you to join us for the spiritual sexual shamanic experience. This is better known to most of you as the ISTA Level 1 training. I am regularly leading these courses along with a team of accomplished facilitators all around the world. As a matter of fact, these trainings have taken place in 34 countries. For information on when I'm leading, go to butterflyworkshops.com. Or for a full schedule, you can go to schooloftemplearts.org. Please consider this invitation seriously, because love and freedom are your natural state of being.
Are you wondering what book to read to jumpstart your life? Get the best from relationships? Attain the deepest feelings of intimacy? Do you want the best sex along with great happiness? Get your copy of Sex and Happiness, The Tantric Laws of Intimacy by Laurie Handlers right now. You'll learn how to make love in the unknown, take the performance anxiety and reaching a goal out of sex. You'll learn subtle ways of communication and really important practices to empower you when dealing with an intimate partner. You'll let go of blame and struggle. Doesn't this sound great? Sex and Happiness puts the innocence back into sex and gives Tantra the respect it deserves. Take charge of your life, physically, emotionally, and spiritually with Sex and Happiness by Laurie Handlers. Only $19.99 paperback and $14.99 ebook. Order your copy today by going to butterflyworkshops.com. That's butterflyworkshops.com for your copy of Sex and Happiness.
My question for people right now is, if you're a woman who could use a little zest and zing in your arousal response, or maybe you know women or a woman who could use this, because many women say that their feelings of desire, arousal, and sexual satisfaction don't happen as naturally or as often as they'd like. So I want to tell you about Zestra, because Zestra was developed to meet this much-needed option for women. Zestra's safe and a patented blend of botanical oils and extracts, and it's created to help women have increased sexual sensations. Zestra comes in convenient single-dose personal packets. Each packet keeps the essential arousal oils and extracts free, fresh, and safe from light. And with application of Zestra, it starts to work within 3 to 5 minutes. And at about 10 minutes, there's something called the Zestra Rush. And that can last up to about 45 minutes. The great news is that Zestra can be used as frequently as you like during each sexual experience. Now, I'm somebody who believes that all women deserve sexual satisfaction. That's why I do this show, in case you hadn't noticed. So I believe that men and women deserve sexual satisfaction. So if you're a woman who isn't getting that kind of arousal response that you want, please call 877-426-8047. That's 877-426-8047. And please remember to say you heard about Zestra from Laurie Handlers on the Sex and Happiness Show.
We're back with Sex and Happiness, and again, I'm Laurie Handlers. I'm interviewing Kevin Leroy today, and we're talking about plant medicines and what they are and how to know whether you might be someone who wants to take it. So, Kevin, just give me a list of things you've had experience with, and we'll talk about each one.
Okay, well, I mean, in terms of plant medicine, I think I kind of dedicated my life to exploring almost everything.
Okay.
So the list could be quite long. I think what's useful is to kind of maybe go over some of the things that are more common.
Sure.
And why people might decide to do one or the other. I always, if somebody were to come to me and say, hey, look, I'm really interested in plant medicine, but I have no idea what is out there, what is going on, what's going on, I have them do a little thing called inner inquiry and outer inquiry, which is a little bit of a process where the inner inquiry is gonna be kind of a questionnaire, and it kind of just asks you kind of to go through and figure out what it is what is the end result that you're looking for, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the outer inquiry we touched on a little bit before is about finding out what kind of circles are out there, who are the practitioners that offer this particular modality, and kind of doing research around who they are and what they offer, and talking to people. But in terms of the inner inquiry part, right? So let's just say somebody wanted to work on depression, for example, right? So we might say to them that ayahuasca might be a really good choice because that's been very well researched that ayahuasca is good for depression. So that could be an option there. If somebody came to me and said they've been struggling with addiction, then I might point them in the direction of iboga, which is a little root from Africa, which has been amazing, particularly with heroin addiction. I mean, if they were saying they felt a little bit lost in life and they didn't quite know where to go, I might point them in the direction of Kambo. It really is important to kind of define your intentions before you even decide on which plant medicine you might want to go to. Things like ayahuasca are very broad scope, so you can go to ayahuasca for many different reasons, and all of the plant medicines are going to be able to touch on just about every issue that you might have. But I think the first and most important thing is really to define what it is that you might want to get out of the experience, right?
Right. Yeah, I think that's really important. I never heard of that. That
Iboga.
Yeah, Iboga. I never heard of that before.
So Iboga is it's a little root that grows in Africa, and I'm really lucky to live in the country of New Zealand, because New Zealand, my friend Tanea Peterson, she did a 5-year-long study with this root, and she took people who had been addicted to heroin the requirement for her study was that they needed to be in an active addiction for more than 5 years. And what she did is she gave them a single flush dose of Iboga over 2 days. So it's a 48-hour experience. And she put them into a room, and they were monitored on heart monitors and checked in on every couple hours. And then out of the 40, she did it 150 people. Mm-hmm. And out of that 150 people, 10 of them ever went back to heroin, and she followed up every year for 5 years with all of those people, and 10 of them ever reused. So on the basis of that study and a couple other pieces of work, this Iboga was legalized in New Zealand for treatment of heroin addiction, which was amazing, because before that, all we could do for people was give them medicines which replicate heroin but were legal, so you could go to the pharmacy every day and have your dose of this other medicine, which was cool, which kept them off of the illegal drugs, but it really didn't solve the problem.
Yeah.
And it also introduced health risks of its own, whereas now we have this option in New Zealand where you can go for 2 or 3 days, and you're very unlikely to reuse again, because from a physiological point of view, Iboga actually goes in and blocks. It's exactly the same shape as an opioid molecule, so it sits in the same receptor site in the brain and actually clears out the addiction instantly. Now, whether or not it
amazing.
Yeah, and it's amazing because this thing works, and they know it works, and it works very, very well, and it's very, very repeatable and provable, and it's available for people who need it. I mean, in other countries, you have to know somebody, or you have to kind of go dark web, and you don't really know what you're getting or what's going on. But it's just great that you can go to your doctor here in New Zealand and say, hey, I'm addicted to heroin, and I don't want to be taking this other stuff for the rest of my life, so I would like to try this. And a lot of the GPs will say yes. At the moment, it's still a little bit scary for them. Now, unfortunately, in regards to the screening and the process, is that it was considered, because it was a root, to be a natural medicine. Therefore, you had lots of traditional people having access to this medicine. So they had a little clinic up north, and they didn't really, again, this was a case where they really didn't do the screening, and the lady had a pre-existing heart condition, and they weren't checking up on her every hour, and they didn't have her on heart monitor, and she ended up dying. We had one death, and I think they said at that stage, there'd been about 300 people through the treatment program. So we had a death, and now it's a situation where you go to your local doctor and they say, well, we've had this other treatment for years and years and years, and yes, we know there are big side effects and there's a risk of death, but if someone dies using a very well-known treatment, then that's just considered part of the numbers, and that just happens. But if somebody dies on a newer treatment and an experimental thing, then it can be seen that the doctors made a bad decision and shouldn't have been trying these things out. So it's getting more difficult to get people to be open to these things, but we are making progress.
That's good.
And things are just slowly opening, but it's just about, there's a great duty of care, with the practitioners. And I really am excited, because as things become, it's almost like a paradox, but as things become more legal, then there can be more checks on it, and there can be a qualification required before you serve these things, and that could be very interesting territory for the future, and kind of avoid these.
Well, then there's people who teach and who have studied. I mean, I know lots of people who, not lots, but I know a few people who have gone to Ecuador and a few people who have gone to Peru and found people in the jungle who were the village shamans, and they studied for a long time with these people. So, so I know there are qualifications, and I know they may not be part of a systematized system as yet, but it's coming. Let's talk about Kambo, because there's a new flurry of people wanting to take Kambo, which is something that comes from a frog. It's like poison that comes from a certain frog's back. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a frog it's in Brazil mostly, and sometimes in the top part of Peru where Brazil and Peru meet in the jungle. It's the frog's name is Medusa bicolor. It means the great monkey frog. It's a big monkey frog, and so this frog has essentially a slimy poison all over its body, and any animal that tries to eat this frog would immediately have the experience of this poison in their body and start vomiting. And so everybody really leaves this frog alone, right? So he doesn't get touched. So he doesn't actually they've sort of like over time just completely eliminated fear from this animal. And so what happens is that the tribes people will just call to this frog and he just comes. So they just make the sound, they'll be out, and I've gone on expedition with the Matisse people, and they just literally go on the boat and they go rah, 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 and then the frog just crawls out of the jungle and comes to them.
Come here, little froggy. Come here, little froggy.
Yeah, and the froggy's like, well, nobody messes with me. I don't even know what fear is, and so they do just rub the frog's back, and you get a little bit of this snotty substance out, and it gets dried onto a stick. And then you have a little ceremony about using this medicine. Now, Kambo is again one of these shamanic medicines. But the cool thing about Kambo is it's actually been studied since about the 1920s. Like scientifically, it has many, many peptides in it, which have been shown to have a wide range of effects on the body. They do show that it reduces inflammation. So you have people with arthritis and that sort of thing getting good results. They have shown that it really affects the lymphatic system, which is kind of like the body's sewage system to get rid of stuff. And the interesting thing is that like our circulatory system has the pump, which is the heart, and our respiratory system has a pump, which is the lungs. But the lymphatic system doesn't have a pump. So it gets moved around by body motion mostly. But when people apply Kambo, it's been shown that the lymphatic system like really gets activated, and all the little nodes around the body start pumping. So any toxins that are in there tend to be released quite quickly. It also has an effect of adding more oxygen to the blood. So, I mean, they traditionally use it as hunting magic, right? So they would all get together before they go hunting, have a Kambo session, and then they just go running in the forest, and they don't really run out of breath, and they can go running for much further distances, and they don't get tired, and they don't really need to eat as much. And also, it has a really cool effect, which is that your eyes can see better. You get like, it's almost the effect that I could say is it's almost like you're looking through a high definition monitor or something, because you get more contrast. So the animals that are camouflaged in the jungle stand out against the trees better. And the Indians say that if you do Kambo a lot, that it cleans out your body to a point where you even lose your human scent. So the other animals don't even smell you coming, which is kind of a interesting thing.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I know a lot of people have done it. I guess that's my next thing to try. I know at first it has some, you feel feverish and sick and whatever, but it feels like it's worth doing. I'm probably going to do it. Yeah, so I'm interested in that. And then tell a little bit, because this is sex and happiness. So all the things you're talking about, like whether it's to break through fear and transform something with ayahuasca, or whether it's to get healthier by taking Kambo, or whether it's to break addictions with that other route that you talked about. Everything will add to people's sex and happiness if they get healthier. There's no question about it. As far as I'm concerned, marijuana is the sexiest medicine of all.
Oh, definitely. I mean, as a plant spirit, she comes to me as this, like, this very beautiful Latino woman, and she's just like all about the sensuality and the creativity. Yeah,
Exactly.
Very sexy plant. Yes.
So I think about that. But tell a little bit about San Pedro. Do you know anything about that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, just in the broad term of, sex and happiness, I mean, anything which kind of peels away these layers of story about that we're not sexy and we're not happy, that's going to help in terms of feeling more sexy and more happy. Because I truly believe that our natural state is love, right? I really do believe that. And I think that if you really get down to the core of it, you're either feeling love or you're kind of like in fear that there's some lack of love, at the very, very core. I mean, we put lots of different labels on top of it. So if you're cleaning the body out, I think that, as we, this is going to be a little bit of what you might call woo, but I do think we are spiritual beings, and that our bodies are just, we experience our bodies just as a more dense version of our energetic body, right?
Right.
So I think anytime you're doing work on the physical body in terms of cleaning, you're also opening up channels for emotional happiness too. And so, yes, there's that element of uncomfortableness. And I mean, if you look at Kambo, for example, it's very, very uncomfortable for about half an hour. But then you get sort of like 6 to 4 months of like feeling really good. So for me, it's been a big teacher in that way, that if you're not willing to be uncomfortable for a short period of time, then how do you expect to have long-term rewards? So if you can't be uncomfortable and go for that job interview that's like twice your pay raise that you're getting right now, but there's an opportunity there, then it could be quite uncomfortable to push yourself, but there's that chance you might get it. Same thing asking out a girl who you really like. It's going to be uncomfortable when you have this conversation and go, hey, I really think you're the most beautiful person on the earth, and you feel quite vulnerable asking. But if you're not willing to go through with that, there's going to be no chance that things are going to happen, right?
Exactly.
So a lot of the teaching around, particularly, so the Metis people have this concept they call panema, which is said to be a gray cloud in your aura, or, we might describe it as depression or feeling down or feeling that you don't know what your path is in life. And those kinds of medicines are really good at removing that. And so you suddenly get a lot more clear about who you are and what you really want. And then the fact that you can go through these experiences and literally jump off a cliff into the unknown is a really brave thing. And then you get real brave about doing stuff like asking for a raise at work, or applying for a totally new job, or just moving city to somewhere else, or just becoming a traveling nomad, kind of like me, that just, decides that, I don't need to buy into the fear that we have to be doing the 9-to-5 thing, and I can still go off all over the place and do amazing things. But it's only through kind of that, it's a combination of insanity and trust, where you just go, okay, like, this is possible. Now getting back to San Pedro, which you asked about.
Yeah.
It's absolutely, they call peyote, in the Lakota people, which I grew up with, peyote and San Pedro are kind of like friends to each other, because they're both cactuses. So if you look at it from a physical point of view, they both contain very similar substances in terms of what it does to your body, but they call it the shimmering heart. And it's said to reveal, and it's absolutely heart medicine, it's supposed to reveal your true emotional self to yourself. So it's supposed to really clear up all of these confusions about what it is to connect to yourself first. And the belief system is that, you know, if you want to attract a very hot and sexy sexual partner to yourself, that the first thing you really need to do is be in complete and total love with yourself. You know, some of the stuff that we worked on, you and me, you know, after the Tantra Festival was all about that concept of becoming a sovereign person.
Sovereign, self-love.
Yeah.
Self-directed. Yeah, everything. Self-activated.
Yeah, and so a lot of the medicine work is like, you know, involves taking something, sitting in the dark for several hours with nobody else there except for you, and this experience of what's going on for you inside yourself, and getting really, really clear about what the inner landscape is and who you are and what your desires are and what you truly want to manifest on this planet, and then bringing that back out and doing it. So yeah, that's kind of like the specialty. That's kind of like the bigger picture is, you know, you want sex and happiness, you gotta like be completely happy with yourself before you can ever have anything really valuable to share to other people, right?
Exactly.
Otherwise you're kind of seeking that completion. You're seeking that feeling of being sovereign and complete, but you're seeking that from another person. So you're not really giving them love. You're actually taking.
You're taking.
Yeah. And when you move into that, it's never going to really be sustainable, because eventually people are going to get tired when it's all about, you know.
That's so good.
Yeah.
That's so good. I'm glad you took that away, and probably you knew that anyway beforehand, but you know it even more now. And it's because you experienced a lot of other people like waking up to that there is nothing outside. Everything is inside. There's so much self-love. And then when you get loved from somebody on the outside, it becomes dessert instead of the meal that's supposed to sustain you.
Exactly. And it's like a gift that you can enjoy, rather than this thing that you have to like be desperate to get. And like, you know, people will completely ignore a lot of their boundaries because of the sense of desperation, and they sit in really toxic relationships for a really long time because they think that if they put up with it long enough, eventually it might get better, or that, you know, they really don't have any choice because this is a need that they have to be in this thing, you know, in order to feel safe, really.
Well said.
Yeah. So
well said, Kevin.
Crazy how what kind of dangerous situations people keep themselves in with the psychological need to feel safe.
Yeah, so good. Well, we're going to take a break here. That's a really good place to stop for a second and let people digest that. So when we come back, we'll be finding out how to get in touch with Kevin and what he might be able to advise you in your area. So just stay tuned. We're coming right back. This is really an eye-opening show. This has a lot of real nuggets about what people could experiment with, and what and how to go about it. So stay tuned. We're coming right back.
So many times you've heard Laurie talk about emotional release on this show. She says over and over again how important it is for you and your loved ones. Now you can do emotional release in the privacy of your own home. And you can practice Lottie Han too, meditation that prepares you for making love in the unknown. In her CD, Shamanic Release and Lottie Han, she creates a safe and sacred space in which you can do the powerful work Laurie is known for in her Butterfly Workshops courses. Laurie sets you up with the proper positioning and breathing. Then she guides you through each emotional state to the beat of tribal African rhythms. This CD actually provides an easy way to do emotional clearing work on a regular basis. Order your copy of Shamanic Release and Lottie Han today and watch your relationships walk free of emotional baggage. To order your copy, go to butterflyworkshops.com right now.
As a sex and happiness coach, I understand that increased sexual participation intensifies sexual responsiveness and desire, as well as overall health and well-being. My experience with the Sibian has personally increased my sexual response, and I can now train women to use this machine to have peak orgasms as often as possible. I strongly believe this will add to their health and well-being whether they have a partner or not. The beauty and the miracle of the human body is that it adapts and changes much more rapidly than people change their beliefs or their opinions. The Sibian can make any woman's body more resilient with each peak orgasm. Sibian is an amazing experience, often described as the Lamborghini of sex toys. If you're a woman and you can get yourself to look at Sibian, you should do so. It won't take away from your partner. It will only add. Trust me on this. I love my Sibian. Go to Sibian.com. That's SYBIAN.com, or call 1-800-253-6135. That's 800-253-6135, and say Laurie Handlers told you about Sibian. And by the way, if you do have a partner, ask about Venus for Men. That's Venus, Venus, for men. This is Sex and Happiness. I'm Laurie Handlers. I'm interviewing Kevin Leroy. And Kevin is really he's an expert. He doesn't call himself a shaman, but he calls himself, but I don't even know if he calls himself an expert, but I am. So he's an expert in indigenous people, experience and plant medicines. He's done everything he could possibly find. He's not closed to anything. I think I was with him when he probably did his first kava, when we talked about you saying a tsunami. I don't know if you had done kava before. I certainly hadn't. And all I felt about it was I got a little numb in my tongue and a little numb on my lips. I don't know what you felt.
Yeah, well, I was just really keen because that was my first time to have kava, and was really wanting to connect to the
plant.
And the land. And the land and the spirit of the land, and through the medicine, usually that's the way you do it. And I'm really good at navigating those kind of spaces. And I understand kava as a muscle relaxant and as kind of a more of a social bonding experience. So for me, it's worth going, because I know that they kind of like, they don't want to have all the tourists running around with wobbly legs, so they kind of like, introduce it gently. But I just reckon if I'm gonna have my one and only chance, I might as well go full force.
Yeah, good for you.
Yeah.
So let's see. So based on what I said in the earlier segment, you might advise people. You seem to feel that you know people pretty much all over the planet that could help people interested in this, in introducing them to plant medicines. So I'm going to suggest that maybe you would set yourself up as somebody who people could contact if they want to find somebody in their area. Is that what we could agree to?
Yeah, absolutely. Because part of that process that I kind of touched on that outer inquiry part of my process. So if somebody ever came to me and said they were interested in plant medicine, I would take them through that process of defining what their needs were first. But then I'd kind of talk to them and say, okay, well, there's several different ways you can do ceremony. You can spend thousands of dollars on an airplane ticket, go deep into the jungle, go and sit with somebody who's very, very traditional, but some people might feel really uncomfortable that they're far out in the jungle and there's not the same language being spoken and they don't understand the words that are in the songs. So, there's also options, there's people just about everywhere. The really cool thing about these times is that this is waking up, and there's people, almost every major city that I can think of that are holding circles in the local language, who are using the same concepts, but just relating in a more modern context. So you may want to find one of those. You may want to go to a retreat where you're fed delicious food and you have your ceremonies and you've got somebody there really dedicated to the integration process. Afterwards, you may need to spend a day or two speaking to someone who's got those kind of skills. And so it's really good to understand that you've got different options and different things will appeal to different people. You know, you may kind of want a more folksy kind of, 6-person circle where you sing lots of really heart songs, or you may just want to sit in complete darkness. And so, so with my experience, I can kind of advise you of what I know of and who I know of and take you through a process where you can kind of decide for yourself what really appeals and what is going to work in terms of your comfort levels and yeah. So that's kind of what I do anyway.
Okay.
So it's a good thing. It's a good conversation to have.
Yeah.
I don't personally ever go to anybody and say, hey, you need to be doing plant medicine. But if anybody's feeling that it's something that they're interested in or they might want to explore, I am really happy to share all of my experience and all of my knowledge with anybody who asks.
That's great. That's perfect. That's a perfect setup. So how is the best way for people to get in touch with you? Is it email?
Yeah, at this point, email, because I haven't really, I don't really have quote unquote a business or a consultancy business or anything of that nature. So if they just want to contact me, it's Kevin.Leroy. So it's KEVIN.LEROY @gmail.com. I will be more than happy. Yeah. And if you just want to make it stand out, you can just say that you've got a plant medicine inquiry, and then I'll go from there. And and then just let me know where you are, what you're thinking, what your experiences in the past have been with medicines, and what kind of outcome you're desiring, and then we can go from there. Because
wonderful.
I mean, I've got my entire life behind me, and I've been doing not much anything else other than just traveling this world and finding out what it is that happy, sexy people do.
That's awesome. That's so awesome. Well, I'm so glad that our paths crossed. And
yes.
Yeah, and I'm so glad we sat together at the kava ceremony. And then we sat together many more times over the next week at ISTA, which was wonderful. And
amazing.
Yeah, so thank you, Kevin. Oh, and I just want to say, I might as well say, I have a shaman, an Ecuadorian shaman coming to Arizona in February, and it might be that we take people to Ecuador then. I'm not sure, but we're planning a 3-part medicine trip, like a tour of 3 different parts of Ecuador: beach, jungle, and mountains.
Wow.
And we're going to do 3 different medicines, one at each. And she's definitely, I did some other huasca with her. I didn't do ayahuasca with her. I did a tea ceremony that lasted only a couple hours, but it was wonderful. I had a very, very powerful dream, a dream sequence when I did this with her. And so she's coming in February, and I'm not sure whether we're planning the trip in February or whether she's coming to Phoenix, but everyone should stay tuned with me because I am in communication with someone that has been trained by her traditional ancestors. So, so I'm excited about that too. And I wasn't going to say that. And then I said, no, I better say that. I'm going to be working with Jocelyn. So thank you so much today for being my guest. It is such a pleasure to speak with you, Kevin. And you're an expert in many other things too. You're you told me you were a sponge to soak up knowledge.
Yes, well, the thing is, I don't know, I just have, I'll just sit there and, I don't know, there's some part of my brain that's hardwired just to absorb it and relate information and kind of mix it all up and change it into something that's really accessible to people. So it's just my passion.
Yeah, thank you for doing that. That's one of your superpowers. So thank you. Yeah. And everybody, stay tuned. I will have another amazing guest the next time. I actually have a guest coming on the show who is a man who has been experimenting with polyamory for over 40 years, I think, something like that, which it hasn't really been fashionable until maybe the past 10 years. But this man was a forefront runner in the idea that maybe he couldn't only be with one person. And so he is coming on the show next time to share with us some wealth and some nuggets that he's learned over the years of being new and different and a forerunner in a movement that's only more taken hold lately. So he should be really interesting. I don't know him, but he was highly recommended to me. So please tune in to Sex and Happiness then, when I will have that guest. And thank you all for listening today. It makes my day to do this show. It makes me more alive to share with you those that I meet and their gifts. So Kevin, thank you. And everybody else, thank you so much. This is Laurie Handler signing off for Sex and Happiness.
Thank you for joining us today for Sex and Happiness. To learn more about Laurie and her work, please go to butterflyworkshops.com or follow her on Twitter or Facebook. You can send her an email at sexandhappiness@gmail.com. We'll see you again right here next week for another edition of Sex and Happiness.